was just a tree. That's what I thought. Standing tall behind our house like it had always been there. It looked ordinary, like a fixture. The kind of thing you'd walk past without a second thought. But there was more to it, at least. That's what they told me. Every year, on the first full moon after my birthday, we did the same thing. We didn't talk about it much. Didn't make a fuss. It was just part of our life. My grandmother was the first to teach me. She'd take me out there early in the morning, before anyone else was awake, and hand me a small basket, usually with honey, some bread, and a few sprigs of rosemary. She'd kneel beside the tree, mumbling softly to it. I remember the way her hands trembled as she pressed the offerings into the dirt. Not with fear, but with respect, as if she knew something I didn't. She never really explained it, just kept saying, "The tree has watched over us for generations. We must give it something, or it will take something." I didn't understand. I was just a kid after all. To me, it was just a big tree. What could a tree possibly do? But then my father disappeared. I never got the full story. I was too young. People said it was an accident. But deep down, I always wondered if the tree had something to do with it. My grandmother would never talk about it, only say, "That's the price we pay." Years passed, and when it came time for my own offering, I started to notice something strange. I felt a kind of pressure, like I was expected to do it. Not because I wanted to, but because that's just how things had always been. So, when my birthday came again this year, I decided I wasn't going to do it. I figured, it's just a tree. It can't be that important. I didn't need to follow the same old routine. I was older now. I had my own life, my own world. I wasn't going to be a part of some superstition. I remember walking out to the tree, holding the basket in my hands. I glanced at it, then back down at the fruit and bread inside. For a second, I felt like I was supposed to say something important. But I didn't. I just put the basket down on the ground, gave the tree one last look, and walked away. No prayer, no whisper, just silence. I thought that would be the end of it. I went inside, had breakfast, did the usual morning things, but something was different. The air felt heavier, like something was waiting, but I couldn't explain it. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Later that night, I sat at my desk in my room, my back turned to the window. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My grandmother's words kept echoing in my mind. I laughed it off. There was no reason to believe it. I was being stupid. But then, the lights flickered. Just for a moment. Then everything went still. Dead silent. I turned my head toward the window, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move. Just a shape. A shadow. No sound. No breath. But it was there. Under the tree. Watching me. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Something had changed. And that night, when I went to sleep, I didn't dream. The kind of sleep where you wake up and you can't remember the last time you moved. Just heavy, like the earth had its weight on my chest. That was the first night, but not the last. The day after I skipped the offering, nothing happened. No thunder, no plagues, no monsters creeping out from behind the bark. I started to feel stupid for ever hesitating, like I'd let my grandmother's stories get into my head. I went to school, I laughed, I played music, I even forgot the basket was still sitting out there rotting beneath the roots. But that's the thing with change. It doesn't come with a warning. It leaks in, quiet, slow. That night, I noticed the house felt colder. Not the kind of cold you fix with a blanket, the kind that gets inside your bones. I thought maybe the window was cracked, but it wasn't. The thermostat said 72. My skin said winter. I sat on my bed with the lights off scrolling, trying to distract myself, and that's when the silence hit me. Not peace, not quiet. Silence, like the world outside had taken a breath and forgot to exhale. I got up, walked to the window. The tree was still there. Still, too still. You ever look at something and know it's not just sitting there, like it's pretending to sit still? That's what it felt like. The air around it moved wrong. The leaves didn't sway, they twitched, like something breathing through clenched teeth. The next morning, I asked my grandmother if she'd seen the basket. She said no. She hadn't been out there since her knees gave up. But the look in her eyes, it shifted too. She asked me one question, just one. Did you kneel? I didn't answer. She didn't ask again. She just stared at the wall for a long time. Later that evening, things got worse. My dog, Bolt, wouldn't go outside. He stood at the back door, hackles raised, tail stiff, and he growled. Low, deep, not angry, terrified. I opened the door to let him out. He backed away, turned, ran under the table, and wouldn't come out for hours. That was the first time I felt uneasy in my own home. That night, the lights flickered again. Then they cut out completely for about 10 seconds. Just enough time to hear the wind stop. Just enough time to hear the floor creak upstairs, even though no one was there. Just enough time to see something. When the lights came back on, I was standing at the window. I don't remember getting there, but I was looking outside, and the basket was gone. The dirt where it sat was untouched, smooth, like it was never there, and the tree looked closer, not physically, not like it moved, but it felt closer, like it had leaned in just a little while the lights were out, and went back before I saw it. That's when I knew. Something had shifted, not just the wind, not just the lights, something deeper, older, watching, and it wasn't going to stay silent much longer. I didn't talk to her for a couple of days after that. Not out of anger, just a quiet kind of distance. She had her routines, morning tea, the same armchair, the same radio station playing gospel at low volume. And I had mine, headphones in, avoiding eye contact, pretending none of it was happening. But the silence between us felt wrong, thicker than usual, like the house itself was waiting for something to break. On the third morning, I woke up to the smell of burning. I ran downstairs and found her in the kitchen, standing over the stove. The kettle was screeching, dry and glowing red underneath. Her eyes were open. She wasn't looking at anything, just standing there, still. I called her name. No response. I reached out to touch her arm. She snapped out of it, suddenly alert, like I'd yanked her back from somewhere far away. She looked at me, blinking, confused, then said something I'll never forget. Did you hear it too? I asked what she meant. She just shook her head and sat down like nothing happened. That night she called me into her room. She wanted to talk, said she had a story to tell me, one her mother told her and her mother before that. I sat on the edge of her bed while she stared at the wall, voice low and shaking. She said the tree wasn't just something to honor. It wasn't a guardian. It wasn't even a symbol. It was a mouth that eats what we give it to keep it from eating us. She said it didn't protect us. It simply kept a deal. And when that deal was broken, the tree remembered. Not like a person, like something older. Something that didn't forget. But the more she spoke, the more I started to notice something strange. Her voice, it didn't sound like her. Not in tone, in rhythm. The way she pronounced certain words felt off. Like the sentences weren't hers, like she was reciting something, repeating lines like a script. She kept saying things twice, first soft, then louder. It watches, it watches. It waits, it's hungry. It's so hungry now. I asked her to stop. Couldn't take it. She blinked, smiled faintly, and said, "It's already inside." I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed with my blanket pulled to my chin, staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps, for wind, for anything that might feel normal. But the house didn't breathe. The walls didn't groan. There was only stillness, and somewhere faintly a creaking sound, like bark splitting open. I started to wonder if it was still my grandmother in that room, or if something else had sat down in her skin just to tell me a bedtime story. I stayed away from the tree after the night she said those words. "It's already inside." I told myself she was confused, maybe dreaming, maybe just getting old. But I stopped eating right, stopped sleeping. The house felt heavy, like it was sinking into the ground, and everywhere I looked, I felt pulled. There was one afternoon, early, just after the rain, where the backyard looked clearer. The tree stood in sunlight, still, beautiful even, and I wondered if maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe it was guilt, maybe I needed help, maybe I'd grown up so disconnected I turned old traditions into monsters. So I walked outside. No fear, no offerings, just curiosity. The grass was damp, the soil soft. My shoes sank a little with every step, and as I got closer, I noticed something I'd never really paid attention to before. There were carvings in the bark, not initials, not hearts or jokes, not the kind of thing kids sneak into trees with pocket knives. These were deliberate, measured, rows of names. Some I recognized, family, some I didn't, but they shared my last name, generations of it. Some were almost faded, swallowed by time, but others, fresh. That's when I saw his name, my father's, clear, deep, marked with a date I'll never forget, the day he disappeared without a trace. Just beneath it, my grandfather's, and beside that, another name I barely remembered, an uncle I only knew from a photo in the hallway, whose face no one spoke of. And then I saw mine, not carved shallow like the rest, but hollowed in, like the tree was already making space. No date yet, just a name, waiting. I stumbled back, my hand catching the bark for balance, and that's when I felt it. The texture beneath the outer layer. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't rough, it was soft, pliable, like skin, and it felt warm, alive. I yanked my hand back, and the tree made a sound like an exhale, like it had been holding its breath since I got close. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I dug through the old boxes in the attic, dust-covered trunks wrapped in twine. Most of it was junk, faded photos, old books, my grandfather's war medals. But near the bottom, I found a leather journal. No name on the cover, just a symbol. 3 roots tied in a knot. The same symbol I'd seen carved at the base of the tree. I flipped through the pages. The handwriting was frantic. Some of it was smudged like it had been written in panic. Words repeated again and again. The bark remembers. We are the debt. It takes what we owe. One passage stood out. Every first sun, every third winter, if not offered freely, it chooses. I didn't understand all of it, but I started to realize this wasn't a tradition, it was a contract. The offerings weren't gifts, they were payments, to keep something from knocking on our door. And now, the payment was overdue. The worst part wasn't seeing my name, it was knowing. The tree hadn't finished carving it, because it was waiting for something. I packed a bag that night, just some clothes, a charger, my headphones. I didn't even leave a note. I figured if this thing, whatever it was tied to the house, to the tree, maybe I could outrun it. I told myself it was logical, but really, I was just scared. more scared than I'd ever been. I took my grandmother's car, drove through the back roads, didn't even look in the rearview mirror. For the first hour, it felt like it was working. I could breathe. The tension in my chest loosened. I even laughed once, out loud, at how crazy it all sounded from the outside. A haunted tree? Generational sacrifice? It felt like something out of a campfire story. But then the signs started repeating. I saw a crooked gas station I passed 20 minutes earlier. Same flickering light. Same old man outside, unmoving like he'd been carved into the bench. I turned off the main road. The trees started getting denser. Too dense. Like they were closing in around me. The sky got darker, faster than it should have. Even the GPS stopped working. No signal, no routes, just static. That's when I saw it. In the distance past the fog, the outline of something tall, familiar, wide. The tree, right in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, the car skidded to a stop. But when I stepped out, heart pounding in my throat, it was gone. Just mist, just silence. I drove through the night, no music, no radio, just the engine and my own thoughts. When I pulled into a roadside motel at 2:17 a.m., I was exhausted. The lady at the front desk didn't even ask for ID, just handed me a key and said, "Room 7, don't open the curtains." I laid down without changing, shoes still on, bag still zipped, and for the first time in days, I slept. But the dream I had, I was in a hallway, long, narrow, walls made of wood or maybe flesh. There were carvings along the sides, names, dates, symbols dripping sap. I walked and walked. The hallway never ended until I reached a door. Behind it, I heard breathing. Not mine, not human. It was slow, wet, patient. I opened it and I saw... I don't remember. All I remember is waking up with bark dust on my fingertips and sap smeared across my neck. When I left the motel the next morning, I checked my phone. Signal had returned, and so had the GPS. I looked up my location. I was 3 miles from home. The tree didn't follow me. It didn't need to, because I'm not carrying the curse. I am the curse. I haven't been home since that night. Since I drove through fog and forest, chasing freedom and finding a motel 3 miles from where I started. I've been staying in a small room outside town, curtains drawn, lights on all night. It doesn't help. The tree doesn't need soil anymore. It's inside me now. At first, it showed up in dreams. I was underground, not buried, just under. No soil, no sky, just roots, tangling through my legs, pulling gently, not to hurt me, but to anchor me. Every time I woke up, my sheets were damp, my feet were dirty, my fingertips sticky with something like sap. The smell of it clung to me, sweet, sour, alive. I couldn't shake it. I started hearing things too. Not voices, not at first, just scratching behind the walls. Wood groaning like it was swelling with water. The soft knock of something tapping. At night, I'd dream in flashes, a burning field, my father kneeling at the base of the tree, pressing his forehead against it, my own hands carving, bleeding, laughing. But I wasn't afraid in the dreams. I felt peaceful. That scared me more than anything else. One morning, I woke up with the marks across my arms. Not scratches, patterns, whorls, circles, symbols that faded by lunch but left a pressure like they were still there under the skin. I stopped going outside. The world felt like it was tilting around me, bending, reshaping. The tree wasn't just haunting me, it was rewriting me. I tried calling my grandmother. No answer. I messaged. Nothing. After the second day, I called someone from back home, a neighbor. They said they hadn't seen her in a while, said the lights had been on for 2 nights straight, said something smelled off. I didn't know what to say. I didn't ask them to check. I had another dream that night, But it wasn't like the others. It wasn't blurry or strange. It was clear. I was standing in the backyard, under the tree, but the tree looked different. It was split open at the middle, like a mouth. Inside, I saw things, faces, bones. My own hands tied with vines, held up like roots, were stringing me like a puppet, and the tree spoke, not with words, with knowing, like it was reminding me, this isn't a punishment, it's inheritance. I woke up gasping. The window was wide open, the curtains torn. There were leaves on my bed, fresh, wet, and still warm, and carved into the wood beneath my pillow. One word: return. I didn't pack a bag, didn't shower, didn't lock the door behind me. I just started driving. Back to the house, back to the tree, because I finally understood. I didn't run away from it. Carried it with me. It's not finished with me yet. I didn't expect anything when I pulled into the driveway. No wind, no movement. Just the house, exactly as I left it, but somehow smaller, like time had folded in around it, swallowing all the noise, all the light. I sat in the car for a while, not because I was afraid, because I knew. The moment I stepped out, there was no going back. The grass had grown tall, but the path to the backyard was cleared, almost groomed, as if the tree had been waiting. I walked inside. The door creaked, slow and heavy. The air smelled thick, old. Every clock had stopped at the same time. 2:37 a.m. I checked every room. My grandmother's slippers were still by her bed. Her teacup was half full on the table, but she was gone. Not vanished, taken. I found what was left of her in the garden, her rosary beads wrapped around the roots, not dropped, not broken, woven, like the tree had pulled her in. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there and stared at it. This thing, this towering, breathing thing that had watched my family for generations. I finally understood. The offerings, the prayers, they weren't about worship. They were about balance. Give a little and you're spared. Take too long, and it takes. So I did the only thing I could. I walked to the base of the tree, took off my shoes, knelt, pressed my palms into the soil, and I spoke. You can have me. I'm sorry. Let it end with me. At first, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled, not violently, gently, like a sigh. A root shifted beneath my knee. The bark cracked open just slightly, and something warm touched my spine. Not pain, not force, acceptance. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt home. No fear, no thoughts, just stillness. I don't know how much time has passed since then. Sometimes people come to see the tree. They say it's the fastest growing wood they've ever seen. They chop it, sell it, build with it. But no matter how much they take, it grows back. Sometimes I wonder if they feel it when they cut into me, if they hear the breath I can't draw, if they see the tear that runs down the bark. We inherit more than just memories and names. Sometimes we carry burdens, old promises, forgotten debts, passed down through the generations. Nature has a way of reclaiming what we take for granted. We think we control it, but in truth, it watches, grows, and waits for us to recognize its power. The earth is alive, and sometimes its silence speaks louder than any warning. Every choice leaves a mark, whether we know it or not. Breaking tradition, ignoring warnings, or even staying silent, it all leaves a trail. And sometimes that trail leads us right back to the roots we tried to walk away from. I was never meant to live forever, but now I grow.